we are.
Here we are.
Are you pumped?
Fucking pumped.
We're talking about Hedy Lamarr.
Who the hell are we?
Well, this is a history podcast. It's called Ill Repute. It is about whoever the hell we want it to be about. Usually it's about women that were pioneers in some way, criminal masterminds, pioneers in their fields, or maybe just an epic slut. Maybe just a really good whore. We're here to celebrate those women and gender nonconforming folks. And I am Sovereign Syre, one of your hosts. I am a screenwriter, a stand-up comedian, a regular writer, podcaster, painter, and a former public-facing commercial sex worker that was in the business of pornography for 10 years before becoming a screenwriter. So that's who I am. And I'm coming to you from the traditional land of the Chumash and Tongva tribes here in East LA. And we like to acknowledge that where we're broadcasting from, because it's essential to recognize the historic and ongoing presence of these native tribes, both the land's original caretakers and as enduring communities in the present day, because native people are extant. And who are you?
And I'm Ela Darling. I'm a former librarian, a VR entrepreneur and pioneer, an amateur roboticist, though I did actually kind of do it professionally, so I really should give myself more credit for that. I've been in the adult film industry for, it's almost 14 years. It's almost my 14th porniversary. It's in a week or two.
Wow.
So yeah, and I am now a podcaster thanks to you. And I am recording on the traditional lands of the Tonkawa, Comanche, and Lipan Apache peoples, each their own distinct and unique tribe whose ancestral connections to this region span generations and continue on today. Because once again, native people are still here.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. Very much so.
Yes.
There are
so
millions of them. Millions and millions. People don't realize that. Millions and millions.
I think it's really common to talk about native tribes and indigenous tribes as though they're mythical. Yeah. And because of that, we'll talk about them like they're not here anymore. And then they lean really hard into offensive mysticism that they attribute to tribes that really they didn't have any connection to begin with.
What happens is once the majority of the population has been killed, erased, cleansed, as it were, in an ethnic cleansing sense, there's a series of things that go on with the oppressing population. One of them is now that these other people are no longer a threat, now we will mythologize them, and now we will see them as special or mystical. And then the other part of the process is pretendianism, which is we become you, which is why you see a lot of people struggling to claim a native identity because it justifies their presence. It's all part and parcel of the process of genocide, which I got that information from Dr. Kim Tallbear, who does write quite extensively about apocalypse and genocide and native ways of knowing. She's Indigenous Technoscience. It's a really cool title.
That's cool.
But she wrote a book called Native American DNA and the Myth of Belonging, which is about, I'm getting the title wrong, but it is about how DNA science interacts with notions of belonging and family ties and cultural ties and ancestry. Interesting side journey if you feel like going on it.
This is one of the things I love about recording this podcast is I'm constantly learning, and learning is actually my love language. So it's just a declaration of love. It's my love letter to you, to each other. So we last week covered part 1 of Hedy Lamarr and her story. Do you remember where we last left off?
Yes. She was acting and being an actress. And then she met a hot guy and they were engaged. And then he wanted her to quit acting and she was like, no. And he then committed completed suicide. And that is very tragic, obviously. And we talked a little bit about how something like that would have impacted a young, ambitious person to have someone commit an act like that of self-destruction as a form of protest against her independence, and how intense that must have been. I mean, I'm sure the amount of guilt that would be felt is probably unreal.
That was a little bit of an interesting thing to me, because I've had partners when I was her age and very focused on my own career similarly weaponize my love for them in a way to try to control me by threatening to hurt themselves or actively hurting themselves and making it seem like it was something that I did to them, rather than something they were doing to try to exert control over me. And damn, it sure is a universal lived experience for a lot of women, that sort of dynamic. Have you ever had partners like that?
I hear about this mythical partner that, threatens to kill, offers to unalive themselves. And that's never happened to me. And I have to assume it's because anybody that I've been partnered with knows that I would view that threat as an offer and not a threat. And that in no way would incentivize me to do anything differently. But I'm also very much like, once we're done, we are done. Mm-hmm. You can call me sobbing. You can tell me you want to kill yourself. I do not care. You are dead to me. Like, whatever has gotten us to that point of fracture. And I also just have always applied that sort of clean break kind of approach to relationships ending. It's just like, okay, I'm out, we're done. There's no oh, we can still be friends. I don't do that. It's just a fool's errand,
Yeah, I do that as best I can, but it's something I learned to do after I stopped dating abusive people, because then that was somebody that I did actually still want in my life despite the breakup.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I kind of got past this sort of mired time in my life where it was just a lot of toxic, shitty men. As though that was a time as though that's not the entire lived female existence, but you know what I'm saying.
I was going to say, I have had more than one person threaten to kill me if I left, which is a different side of that coin. So I've definitely had that experience, like that level of control of, if you go, I'll kill you. I've been held at gunpoint. The things that people have done to me, and those are the people that like me. Like, they said they left me.
Yeah.
I shudder to think what someone that didn't like me would do.
I like the idea of some dude trying to threaten you this way is just almost romantic. It's like, wow, so we're aligned on the same goals.
Yeah, well, exactly. I'm like, I'm ready to wrap it up right now. Like, at any point in time, I'm ready to wrap it up. Go to the other side. Like, I'm good. Like, don't threaten me with a good time. I'm very ambivalent and non-committed to living. That is a through line. And for that reason, I will probably live to be like 85.
I think this is during one of our ho-huddles in Highland Park, we were having a conversation about this. And the phrase that stood out to me was, sometimes it's not that I don't want to be alive. I'm just not that attached to it. Yeah. Kind of take it or leave it.
Yeah. Well, so
kind of overhyped.
Yeah. Well, they say, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to die alone. And I'm always like, I'm afraid I'm going to die having never once been left alone. Like, it's a completely opposite fear, Like, anytime I'm with someone and they're like trying to talk to me, I'm like, what? I'm busy. Because I've usually got my head buried in a book or I'm doing something, like, it's like I have the opposite. I have to stop and remember that you have to pour into others so that they can pour into you,
Okay. So that's a great recap. She skipped school for 2 days, tricked her parents into, excusing the absence, and used that 2 days to land herself a job as a script girl, and then get some roles in some films, which were immediately not big enough or good enough for her because she is that bitch. And she's about to go to school for theater. So she's about to leave and go to Berlin to study under a very famous director named Max Reinhardt. So Max Reinhardt, he was a very innovative and creative director. He started off as an actor in the early 20th century Europe and quickly transitioned to directing. He showcased a knack for pushing the boundaries of traditional theater. His influence in his work was profound. He redefined the role of directors as artistic visionaries, and his hallmark was his keen eye for spectacle, seen in his lavish productions that melded technology, set design, and lighting in unprecedented ways. Sovereign, would you audition for this director?
I absolutely would, and would probably find him fucking insufferable. You're reading this, and I'm just like, oh, the birth of the auteur? Fantastic. That didn't fuck up anything in Hollywood. Not at all. Everything went fucking great when we decided that we could have artistic geniuses that were unconventional and worked their players really hard and had visions for their sets that required a lot of effort and required everyone there that wasn't getting paid the same amount of money to be equally passionate about his vision. I can't see how that led to anything fucked up in Hollywood, like over, the couple, like the 150 plus years that have followed. It seems like that, it was a wonderful institution to emerge from Vienna.
Absolutely. 10 out of 10, no notes. It's just like when you when you start working for a really, really great company and they tell you that it's like a family here.
Right.
That's a great sign. That's a green flag for definitely someone who's going to respect your time.
Other green flags, like looking for someone that wants to be a rock star, insert title, rock star.
Or a guru of.
Yeah. Really good at managing unexpected whatever, like good on the fly, which means I'm never going to actually give you direction and you're always going to be wondering what your actual job at this company is. And no matter what you think it is, it's wrong. And then you're going to be like demoralized for it.
And every time you do it wrong, even though we didn't tell you what to do, that's a fireable offense.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going on in podcasting right now. There's a very popular podcast that has had like a thing come out about the toxic workplace, and the accusations weren't like horrible, but it was. I'm like, oh, podcasters are starting to understand what entertainment is like, which is someone that's good at making something or acting or singing, right? Someone's talented at something, and then executives or other people go, let's put them in charge of things. Let's make them a producer. Let's make them an executive producer. Let's make them a director, right? Mm-hmm. But this person has no leadership skills. Like they're good at a thing. They're not. And so inevitably, like what emerges are these really toxic workplaces. They're especially problematic in entertainment. They're horrible. But you end up having basically kind of a little tyrant that doesn't know how to lead and is constantly frustrated by like leadership problems, like getting people to be on the same page, organizing workers, I don't know, creating a guidebook so that people know what their job is and like what their position requires and what is not extra work. Like all the things that you kind of get spoiled with in corporate go away when you enter the entertainment industry. It really is the Wild West. I mean, it's like the lunatics are running the asylum because someone's good at something, so they put them in a position. Like the first thing that should happen, say when a podcast gets really successful, and if ours became successful, this is the first thing I would do is like as soon as you're in a position to be hiring people, like you hire an operations manager who just makes sure, and an HR thing, so that just makes sure that like everyone knows what their job is. Like there's a structure. There's none of that. And there certainly was none of that in the 30s when she entered this industry. I mean, like I can't imagine what it was like for actresses trying to make it in cinema, even in, I don't know, the 90s, let alone the 60s and 70s, let alone the 50s, let alone the 40s. The fucking 30s. I mean that would have been like encouraging your daughter to like join the NFL, you know? I mean, it's like, it's just, and go hang out in the locker rooms. It's just.
Right.
Wolf's Den.
Everything you're saying about film, about the sort of you're good at something, so you're promoted to a position until you're bad at your job, and then you get stuck there.
Yeah.
That same thing happens in corporate. It's just any kind of workplace. People think that a good manager is someone who was really good at the job of the people that they're managing, and a good manager is good at management, and that's all it is.
Yeah.
I don't need my manager to know how to do my job. That's why you hired me to do it. I need them to manage and handle shit.
Yeah.
And it just never changes.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's Reinhardt. He founded the Max Reinhardt School in Vienna in 1929, which became a hub for nurturing emerging talents. And he imbued his teachings with his pioneering spirit, encouraging students to embrace technological advancements. Now, this says Vienna. I believe it was actually Berlin. There might have been two, but she is off at the school in Berlin.
Okay.
His use of technology in productions was revolutionary. He used revolving stages, trapdoors, and elaborate machinery. And this innovation created dynamic stage transformations and was very immersive to the audiences. But it sounds like a lot of extra work for everybody involved, and they were almost certainly not being paid a bonus for that.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine, the equivalent today would probably be like James Cameron doing the Avatar stuff, where it's like spending years and like building whole tanks for the underground and like this kind of stuff. I do think, like, man, this must have been such a wildly fun time also to be in entertainment. I'm a really big fan of Buster Keaton. I think probably one of the greatest performers and directors of all time. Broke every single bone in his body doing stunts over his career. Innovated so many camera and cinema tricks that we still use today. The most famous was a movie he made called The General. And it involved a scene where a train goes across a bridge, like over water, right? And the bridge collapses and the whole train like falls into the water. And he's on top of that train. And that was a practical effect. That was not faked. There was no way to fake it. The whole famous thing of the front of a house falling down and it almost crushing you, except like the guy goes through like a window. Yeah. He invented that. Like he would create houses that were almost like Rube Goldberg devices. Mm-hmm. So it, like a lot of the scenes would be sort of like just one misadventure to the other, right? And like the formula was like a set of dominoes as he's like moving through levels of an environment, different pitfalls start happening, and as he gets out of one, he's caught up in another, and it's funny. But the thing is, like, I was reading about Fatty Arbuckle. There was a period of time when I got really into just like the birth of cinema, where they were at this point where they were able to start innovating and really playing around with how they could create magical effects and really heighten the experience beyond just recording like a stage play. When they really started to get into the medium and really see like what it could do in and of itself, like how the medium itself could be used to elevate the material. So it was probably a really dangerous, crazy sexual place to be as a young girl, but it also probably was like really exciting. And I'm sure all the fuckboys that she was meeting on set were really exciting because they probably all thought they were visionaries and they were making history, and, you know, and they were kind of the first rock stars, I think, that was sort of like the first real, I mean, celebrity was around, like you had public speakers and lecturers and stuff like that. But I think, just something about the moving image was something that the culture was like not prepared for. And so that weird celebrity that was starting to emerge, I'm sure that was like super exciting.
Especially because he was so innovative for his time. Being cast in one of his productions was incredibly prestigious. It's like being cast in a really, really big avant-garde director's film. Just having your name associated with that director is enough social proof and clout to get you, to get you a little farther than you would without it, for sure.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me that you mentioned sort of slowly realizing the benefits of this medium that was new and approaching cinematography, inventing cinematography from the stage, from your understanding of the stage. Because with the advent of virtual reality, when that came out, the first stuff I was doing was directing like 3D VR scenes. And I realized that with VR, everything we learned about cinema has to be forgotten, and we have to go back to the mentality of directing a stage production because of the sense of physical presence that it gives you. So just any new emerging technology like this, you have to completely flip the script, and it's like all of the tools that you're used to using. It's like walking into a tool shed, into your workshop, and you reach for a hammer and it doesn't exist yet.
I mean, if you go back and watch old movies, it is really interesting how they went about it. I think one of my favorite examples, and I think it was from the 40s, was Night of the Hunter, which is the famous movie with Robert Mitchum where he plays the evil preacher and he has the words good and evil tattooed on his knuckles. I mean, it's like very famous. And when you watch that film, which is like one of my favorite Halloween films, is it's constructed that like these moving images that just linger, and there's a lot of lingering on a tableau, and it's a kind of slow pace, but you see that they're really kind of deconstructing storytelling in this way that's like really interesting. So I mean, I think for people that were working in there in this time, it must have been really, really exciting that they were creating images that no one had even conceived of before, you know?
Yeah.
So it's important to note the profound impact his productions had on the actors fortunate enough to be cast in his works. Being cast in a Max Reinhardt production was more than just an opportunity for actors. It was a gateway to artistic exploration and professional growth. Reinhardt's unique approach to theater demanded a high level of commitment and adaptability from his actors. His elaborate sets, innovative use of technology, and meticulous attention to detail required actors to engage with their work on a whole new level. Through this process, actors were not only challenged in their characters, but also to interact dynamically with the carefully crafted environments. Reinhardt's productions were renowned for their grandeur and spectacle, and being part of such a visually and emotionally immersive experience undoubtedly left a lasting impression on actors. The opportunity to work under Reinhardt's guidance was seen as a prestigious honor and the chance to elevate one's craft. The actors who collaborated with Reinhardt became part of a lineage of performers who had experienced the forefront of theatrical innovation. The skills they honed and the knowledge they gained from participating in his productions often opened doors to a wider range of opportunities in the entertainment industry. So it's like getting a role in the next Greta Gerwig movie. You get to be in that. Or I would say Woody Allen, but ew. That's the thing, like being in a Roman Polanski film, as unfortunate as it is, like is still seen as like a huge honor for actors, because there's those filmmakers that just they have the power to imbue everyone's going to see that movie and everyone's going to think it's a masterpiece.
I think anybody who is in a role where they're basically a kingmaker is granted far too much power in whatever the dynamic they're in. And I think it's pretty much always a recipe for disaster.
And I think like, I know that this happened even in porn, which is just a microcosm of the mainstream. I've worked with directors that in order to produce their vision really required everyone to go out of their way and above and beyond. And there was no compensation for that. And I think the thing that we've learned in all of these articles that have come out about different toxic work environments in the entertainment industry, there have been like 4 or 5 over the last few years where it'll come out that, you know, and like you'll read the thing and it's like just a fucking tyrant, you know, just a really horrible person. And what we've learned is that a lot of times for someone's vision to be achieved requires a certain degree of tyranny and exploitation.
It's like it requires a blood sacrifice.
Yeah, almost. It really does. Yeah.
And because I've only really done porn in terms of acting, quote unquote, in porn, you're paid the same rate whether you're doing dialogue or gonzo, whether you're in and out in 3 hours or you get there at 8 o'clock in the morning and you don't leave until after midnight because you shot the sex scene and now you have to do all the dialogue scenes. And especially when a porn director thinks their vision is so important that this is something they can ask of people who are already making themselves so vulnerable by being like sexually present in their role, that to ask me to do all this extra shit is so audacious. And like, how fucking dare you ask anybody of that? I could not. Yeah. I couldn't ask someone to do that kind of shit. And I worked with my friends when I produced stuff. I wouldn't ask my own friends to do the things that some of these actors are, or some of these directors are demanding. But
yeah, I mean, I said it before. I was like, there's just literally never a reason that anyone should be on set for more than 12 hours. There just isn't. That is bad management. That is bad production management. That is bad time management. And I think that there's this kind of, when people produce something that sells or that's really popular, the financial backers are like, I don't care how they're getting it to the production line. I just need more of it. Like there's a kind of, and the audiences, I mean, Woody Allen and Roman Polanski, people still watch their movies despite knowing, what they're about. And that's crazy. The reason we even have to have these conversations around, can you separate the art from the artist, is because that's how powerful art is. It's like we can't, these movies, these songs, these TV shows, they come to mean so much to us that it kind of supersedes like our own moral compasses. Like I know that people shouldn't be treated this way and they should be punished, but I still want to listen to R. Kelly songs. But I believe I can fly, well,
the other side
R.
of
Kelly
that
gave
is,
us ignition, there's a kind of weird,
the other side of that is, well, yeah, this guy's terrible. But I mean, when you think about it, everyone in Hollywood is terrible. So he's just the one who got caught, as though that doesn't pose an even bigger question.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
All right. Back to Hedy. She arrived at the Reinhardt School in the fall of 1930. And despite being enrolled in this very prestigious school, she just wasn't finding enough purchase to propel her career forward. Roles in Reinhardt's theatrical productions were very competitive. I mean, this is a school where the best of the best are attending. So being the best in your school is kind of like being a 10 in like Idaho and then moving to Los Angeles and realizing that the scale is different and being pretty is just the baseline expectation,
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of where she was at, but she was nothing if not tenacious. So with the help of two of her professors, she snuck into a rehearsal for Reinhardt's upcoming production to get the opportunity to interface directly with him. Unbeknownst to her, he was a little bit precious about people showing up unannounced to his theater like that. And so they got off to a bit of a brusque start, but he did still end up casting her in the small role of second American girl in Das Schwächere Geschlecht, the weaker sex. She performed until the production wrapped because Reinhardt wanted to take it to Vienna instead. And during this period, Hedy was dating. She got engaged again. That guy also tried to tell her she had to quit her career or else, he's going to break up with her. This time he didn't actually kill himself, but he did try to pressure her once again to quit acting. And once again, she broke off the engagement, this time with less loss of life, with a lower KD ratio.
It kind of reminds me of guys that decide they want to open their marriages and then they end up on Reddit crying into their wife's panties because as soon as they open the marriage up, they realize that like they had fucking nothing to offer at all. And their wives would go start a Tinder account and she'd be going on dates like every week with like fucking hot dudes. And he'd be like, this isn't what I thought it would be. And I think if you are engaged to Hedy Lamarr and seriously think that she's so stupid that she doesn't realize what she has on deck to make an ultimatum like that, just tells you about the utter hubris of most mediocre dudes.
Absolutely. Being confronted with the fact that it wasn't your wife that made you unappealing to women this whole time. It was you.
Yep.
It was always you.
Yep.
And she hasn't lost it. You haven't been able to kill that fire in her. She still has that. And other people see it, even though you're blind to it. Oh, man.
That's my favorite genre. That is my favorite genre of Reddit post. Like, I don't post in Reddit. I just lurk. Like, because I don't, Reddit scares me. Like, I would be scared to ever comment ever on Reddit because everyone there just seems to be like cruel.
Yeah.
Reddit is just like, it's like the cruelty of like, if you just got like a million 15-year-olds together in a group and then told them to make fun of the olds. Yeah. I mean,
the polarizing community for sure.
So, but I do lurk in there, and I mainly lurk in the relationship threads, and nothing has made me feel more exhausted for, like, I thought things were shitty. I mean, I have a great boyfriend, but I thought that I had dealt with my fair share of fuckery. Until I found the relationship threads on Reddit, and I was just, holy shit, the things that some women are going through. Like it beggars belief. And I'm sure some of them are fake, but actually the ones that sound the most ridiculous are the ones that I unfortunately realize are probably true. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, also, I think these men who come into her life to date her and then try to take away the things that made her exciting to them in the first place is really common. Men think they want a bad bitch until they have her, and then they want Sarah plain and tall. And if you didn't, like, if that's what you want, then go chase that. But don't try to chase me down and just for the sake of extinguishing the light inside of me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that men, they're wired for reckless pursuit. And then there's conquest, and then it's about trying to control the conquest.
Yes.
And it's just, things are so much better for us now. They're not perfect, but man, at least we have options at this point.
There's so many different men that I can seek to disappoint me.
I mean,
again, I'm joking. I also have a very lovely boyfriend. He's very kind, but I mean, yeah.
I mean, it's the amount of women that went through the pandemic and came out gay is really telling. Really telling. Yeah.
So she has once again said no thank you to this absurd request from a man.
Absolutely absurd.
Not the first, not the last.
Yeah.
So.
With the show over and her heart broken, she was lonely. Berlin no longer held the thrill it had once had, and staying there to finish her studies probably felt pointless to her. Attending the Max Reinhardt School was valuable because it put her in the proximity of the director. But having already been cast in one of his productions, that particular value had already been extracted from the experience. So she decided to drop out and follow Reinhardt back home to Vienna, hoping to reprise her role in The Weaker Sex. The way it's described is she just kind of moved home and showed up to the theater one day. And when Max saw her, he said, "Are you here too, Fräulein Kiesler? Are you living with your family? All right, you can be the Americaness again."
Such a simplified, I hope that's really just all it was. She just showed up and he was like, "Oh, you're here? You're staying with your family? Here you go. Have a role."
Yeah. I mean, I just love Americaness. It makes it sound so fancy. Yeah. The Weaker Sex is a comedy, obviously by the title. Originally titled Le Sexe Fable, written by Edouard Boudet, is about a mother who encourages her sons to target wealthy American tourists. Reinhardt instructed George Weller, the actor cast opposite Hedy, to give the starlet a crash course in the English language and American culture. Easy peasy. Just the idea of this 16, 17-year-old girl in any way successfully pulling off like something even close to an American accent when she can't even speak the language is really funny to me.
She never really nailed the American accent.
Yeah. So she didn't know much about America except it was Hollywood and a bunch of states, but she was excited by American pop culture. Quoting again from Beautiful, The Life of Hedy Lamarr by Stephen Michael Shearer. Quote, "And Hedy loved not only Hollywood, but everything American. There was a little music shop in Austria," she would later tell a film magazine writer. "Every day I used to go in there and ask, 'Have you had any new importations from America? Did any new stuff arrive today?' I knew so much American music. The shopkeeper called me the hot Austrian." She started learning songs with Weller to improve her English at the time, at Reinhardt's direction.
I think I already mentioned this in episode 1, but how when I was a librarian, they called me hot librarian. When I was a porn star, they called me a smart porn star. And the smart anything is better than the hot anything. Also, I bet she was so proud of saying any new stuff. Like, have you any new importations? Did any new stuff arrive today? Also, what do you think about America being just Hollywood and then a bunch of states?
I mean, I think that to this day is true. And RuPaul often says Hollywood is not a place, it's an idea. And that's very true. And I think that post-war America in the early 1900s, so leading up to, the 20s and 30s, there was an absolute fascination with the Old West. Because once the Transcontinental Railroad had joined both sides of the continent and train stations had appeared everywhere and you had a news wire, the frontier was conquested. There was no more frontier anymore. And that's when immediately became this romanticization of the Wild West, right? And you'd have the Wild West Combine shows and all that stuff, which ran into the 20s. And there was a voracious appetite for it. But further than that, what it did was it created this sense of the concept of like, what is America? And it really set it up as this frontier culture. And one of the big ways it was doing that was Hollywood and having this place which was creating these huge films and creating like a star system and creating the concept of a celebrity. There was no such thing as a celebrity before. And now you had celebrities. And it was telling these stories of these very American stories of liberation and the frontier. And something about that, I think, was just really appealing to people in Europe that were, kind of dealing with the fascism that's like coming in. I think there's something about this idea of really escaping any kind of class consciousness and like anyone could be a star. And a lot of the stories that would come out of Hollywood would be that, so-and-so was discovered in a cafe. So-and-so moved out there from, it was really this belief that like anyone can do it and suddenly be like this really glamorous, amazing, larger than life thing. And I'm sure when people actually got to Hollywood and saw how the sausage was made, like a lot of that dissipated. But that definitely to this day is still what brings people in by the busload every year, is this idea that through becoming a star in Hollywood, like you could change your whole life. It's really wild.
Yeah, she definitely was hitching her cart to that horse. And immediately, as soon as she learned about Hollywood, she wanted to be there. So, all right. So back in Vienna, she hit up Sasha Films again, the place that originally hired her as a script girl. And she reconnected with the man who originally hired her, Alexis Kornowski. And he offered her a small role in his film. It was called Die Koffer des Herrn OF, The Trunks of Mr. OF. And it was like a fairy tale for adults. She would shoot the film during the day and perform at the theater at night, and she was about 17 at the time. Reinhardt offered Hedy a much more substantial role in his next theatrical production, Private Lives, that once again featured her former co-star. It's about two spouses who are trying to rekindle their romance and then get a hotel room and realize that one of them dated the other couple. It was a whole thing. But it was a huge step from her previous, much smaller parts. But it wasn't the prestige of this role that made it so memorable. Once again, I'm going to let Mr. Shearer, in Beautiful, the Hedy Lamarr story, I think, describe the scene. Quote, "It was at a rehearsal of a cafe scene in which the couple danced, while I recalled, that's her co-star. There were Viennese newspapermen watching. Suddenly, Herr Professor, which is what they called the director, a man not given to superlatives, turned to the reporters and succinctly pronounced these words. Hedy Kiesler is the most beautiful girl in the world. Instantly, the reporters wrote it down, and in 5 minutes, the Herr Professor's sentence, utter and absolute, had been telephoned to the newspapers of the Innere Stadt to be dispatched by press services to other newspapers, other capitals, countries, and continents. So this is a director that doesn't talk much to the press, and he's just there ignoring them until he stops to turn and tell them this one thing about this one actress, and it immediately hits the newswire. As with many facts about her life, there are conflicting stories about this. Later on, Louis B. Mayer will try to rewrite the story where he was the one who called her that, but that is decidedly false. But, you know, if there's a cool story, it's got to be about the main character, and that's always the man who is talking to you.
I didn't. It is really interesting that, and then in the role she's going to play later, they've already got her playing like a wife that's been married long enough to be like dissatisfied, and she's only 17, which is a little odd to me that they're casting her so young to be playing characters that sound like they should at least be in their like early 20s at minimum. Like even with as young as people would get married at the time, like that still seems kind of crazy that she would be put in these like very adult roles. It's just just an interesting side note that they immediately had her not playing ingenues. Like she's not playing ingenues. Like she's playing wives. I mean, there are girls in porn that won't play a wife because it's too close to a MILF. Like it's kind of wild that she was already, same note, you know. Go ahead.
On that same note, I mean, I can't count how many times I would show up for a scene and be, you know, barely legal, have my first teen lesbian experience again for like the third time since I started doing porn at 23. And then the very next day be cast as the MILF, the mother-in-law of a man who's like 8 years older than me. So I think that's not really the most important aspect of porn. And I wonder how much of this was, we've got this very eager, very malleable young woman who really, really wants to assert how grown up she is.
Yeah.
So if we empower her to feel like that, then, you know, well, you're a grown up. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
It's just easier to take advantage of a young woman who you make feel like she is beyond her years.
Well, it's just like if you cast a movie today and you cast a 17-year-old actress to play the wife of, say, an actor that's in like his 30s and she's like a disaffected, like everything would have to be like addressing the age gap and everything would have to be addressing the fact that she's, do you know what I mean? Like just looking at like how culture has changed, like it would be seen as like, ew, like what are you trying to say with this movie? Like that's like, it's just like night and day where we've come as a culture around stuff like that. But it was just like interesting to me that to have her be playing kind of such a grown-up role. With press like that, the production enjoyed quite a bit of success and attention. Meanwhile, Die Koffer des Herrn OF, the film she had worked on after returning to Vienna, was released around this time. This time, Hedy's performance was recognized and she was mentioned by name in reviews. It would later be recut by the SS in Germany to remove the majority of the film, as much of the screen time was occupied by Jewish actors. Man, they cannot catch a break. On this upward trajectory of Hedy's career, she turned down Reinhardt's next offer of a minor role in his upcoming production, Film und Liebe, because she wasn't offered the lead role due to her poor English skills. Hedy explained, quote, "I've never been satisfied. I've no sooner done one thing than I am seething inside me to do another thing. And so almost as soon as I was inside a studio, I wanted to be acting in a studio. And as soon as I was acting in a studio, I wanted to be starring in a studio. I wanted to be famous," unquote. Her next few roles saw her star on the rise. Sasha Film came through for her again, this time offering her her first starring role opposite Heinz Rühmann, one of the most famous German actors of the time. The film was called Man braucht kein Geld, We Don't Need Money, and her performance and beauty were recognized in reviews.
So finally, finally,
she's a veteran. She's a veteran of
her.
like a fucking 2 whole years. I don't know what Hollywood's problem is, but she's grizzled at this point. I mean, she'll practically be an old maid by the time anyone recognizes her. It is good that it took a whole 6 days for the world to figure out that she was literally the most beautiful girl on the planet. I mean, who has time for that? Not Hedy.
So after wrapping up production on a play called Intimacies, she craved the kind of stardom on the silver screen that simply wasn't going to be found in a playhouse. And so she walked away from the theater, in her mind at the time, for the last time, Much like she walked away from Reinhardt's school in Berlin, as soon as she concluded that she had hit the ceiling of success, she moved on to pursue bigger goals. As soon as she already got cast in a play at school, there was no point in being at school. She already got the thing. Intimacies wrapped in 1932, just a few months before her 18th birthday. But from here, she went to Prague to chase romance, chase a showmance, and to star in the most controversial film of her career, a film called Ecstasy, or Ecstasy. But before we get to Ecstasy, I would like to explore some of the stuff going on culturally in entertainment and for women. And Sovereign, my perpetual queen of context, will you walk us through the concept of the new woman in the early 20th century?
Yes. So the concept of the new woman emerged in the early 20th century as a feminist ideal challenging traditional gender roles and advocating for greater autonomy and equality for women. This period was marked by significant social and cultural changes, and women began to challenge societal norms that restricted their roles to the domestic sphere. The new woman was characterized by her pursuit of education, professional careers, and a desire for independence and self-determination. The New Woman movement expanded the horizons of women in the arts, particularly in theater and film. It ushered in a wave of diverse career opportunities that encouraged women to pursue their ambitions independently. In Vienna, the New Woman movement was deeply embedded in the city's unique cultural and intellectual milieu. It was characterized by a combination of artistic innovation, educational opportunities, psychoanalytic exploration, and active participation in political and social change, all of which contributed to the emergence of the new woman as a symbol of female empowerment and independence in the early 20th century.
The New Woman movement left a mark on women's fashion and representation both in the streets and in film. The evolving fashion trends of the era weren't just about clothes. They were kind of your whole style. Actresses began to project a more progressive and liberated image, boldly challenging traditional gender norms. The characters and roles available to actresses broke free from traditional gender stereotypes up to that point, offering actresses the opportunity to portray strong, independent, and multifaceted women. The movement also ignited social and political engagement. Many women in the cultural sphere actively participated in causes like the women's suffrage movement. Their activism not only enriched the public images of actresses, but also influenced the roles that they chose to portray. Beyond the spotlight, the principles of the New Woman movement also found their way into personal lives. Actresses and women in the cultural scene asserted their autonomy, making decisions about their careers, relationships, and reproductive rights. So this is, I think, around the time, I don't know if it started with Hedy, because she's the first that I'm aware of, but I think this is around the time when the portrayal of actresses on screen started to really affect the way that women's trendy styles would take root. We'll see later, after Hedy gets her first big film in Hollywood, women started darkening their hair to match hers. They started wearing the same sort of hats and things that she wore in her films. They started emulating her style. And I think that is something that kind of started cropping up around this time, was that the way that you style yourself can be open to how other women feel emboldened to present themselves rather than just what has been consistently expected of you.
Yeah, there's a really good documentary called Century of the Self by Adam Curtis. It's free on YouTube. It's a 4-part series, so it's about 8 hours. It's really, really good. But they spend a lot of time talking about exactly this phenomenon. And so there was Freud's nephew was a guy named Edward Bernays, and he invented the term PR. So he worked in propaganda. And then after the war, people didn't like the word propaganda. So he invented public relations. And he was actually initially hired to get women to start smoking cigarettes because it was like very taboo. And so he hired a psychiatrist to get at what cigarettes symbolized to people. And they came back and said they're little penises. And so he saw this as a marketing opportunity. So he found a bunch of blue stockings. And during, it was like the Macy's Day Parade or whatever. It was like one of the big parades. He paid.
What are blue stockings?
Blue stockings were like just usually middle and upper middle class women that were devoted to studies. They had college degrees. They were professional, and they tended to wear blue stockings. And so they were called blue stockings. So a lot of he had these sort of, 20 something daughters of corporate giants that were new women. I'm a new woman. And he said, he paid them to do this stunt where they hid cigarettes in their stockings. And as they were walking in the parade at an assigned time, they all pulled the cigarettes out of their stockings, lit them, and started smoking them at the same time. And they calling them torches of liberty, torches of freedom. And so it suggested to women that if smoking cigarettes aren't going to make you more independent, but they'll make you feel more independent. And that's all that really matters. And this was also the same time when celebrities started endorsing fashion and things like that. And there's really good footage in the Adam Curtis documentary of what these very early commercials essentially looked like. And it would be like a professional pilot or a female tennis player, right? And they're looking at the camera and they're kind of very awkwardly reciting a speech that's been written for them, where they're talking about the importance of clothes, that clothes aren't just about clothing yourself and protecting yourself from the elements. Clothes are also a way that you express yourself and you express your personality. And that's why you should buy clothes that express your personality, because you show people about who you are. So Hedy's coming in right at this time where media is about to overwhelm global culture in a way that no one could anticipate, very much like the internet. But it's this confluence of the emergence of celebrity endorsement, propaganda, and PR is no longer a government job. It's now corporations are hiring propagandists to sell products. It's a very unique time. And I think that's why these figures from the silver screen golden age, Hedy Lamarr, Marilyn Monroe, there's a reason that some of these iconic figures, despite having done the crux of their work in the 30s through like the 50s, still have this weird, endearing legacy, is because they came into the culture at a time when there was an ability to just dominate everything. There hasn't been the same sort of machine. And I think that's why they say now there are very few stars left anymore, because audiences and their access to media and everything else is like, there's so much variety that people tend to be popular within a niche, but then other people will have no idea who they are, kind of thing. But this was a time when celebrity was first starting, and celebrity was something that happened to you. It was an experience that was unparalleled. There wasn't a lot of history of this where anyone could go into a movie theater and see these movies and see these actors and actresses and develop parasocial relationships with their characters and want to dress like them. That was a new thing,
Beyond the spotlight, the principles of the New Woman movement also found their way into personal lives. Actresses and women in the cultural scene asserted their autonomy, making decisions about their careers, relationships, and reproductive rights. So, the New Woman movement had a lot of cool aspects for women at that time, but not all women.
Well, the New Woman movement predominantly spotlighted the experiences and aspirations of white middle-class women who had, of course, the most social mobility. So the New Woman movement was in the 30s. So it was not addressing issues of intersectional feminism, because the concept of intersectional feminism didn't exist until the 80s, when Kimberly Crenshaw, who was a law professor, started to write about those. And that, I believe, is what we would usher in as perhaps calling, well, we call that second, or I guess that's third wave feminism, yes? And like now we're kind of in fourth wave, which is the sort of bimboification era, the sex positive era. Like we've moved into those more progressive areas. So there's that first wave of feminism was really like Simone de Beauvoir, women's rights to vote, things like that. This would probably be part very much, I would think, of late stage first wave feminism. And then second wave feminism is what would come in, I think, the 60s and 70s and 80s, which was dealing more with domestic violence, interpersonal partner violence, wage disparity, stuff like that. We hadn't gotten there yet. We were still just barely climbing up the ladder at this point. So yeah, so suffice it to say, the new woman applied to a very specific type of woman. So it applied to probably not a working class woman. These were aspirations of, ladies who lunch, ladies who can afford to lunch. I still would like to be, just a lady who lunches. I work really, really hard. I'm always 8 scripts ahead. I'm always doing 5 million things, which is hilarious because my great ambition in life is to be a do nothing bitch.
I don't think you could if you tried. I don't think it would. That is not a size that comes in yours.
But I like to think about it. I'm like, oh yeah, that does sound really cool. But then it's by day 2, and you and I had this because we vacationed together. By day 2 in Tulum, it's I'm the one going and then we can do this day, and we can do this day, and then I really want to get this in, and then we should walk over here. And you're a saint for kind of putting up with that, but I'm just let's do shit. Let's get it popping. Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
You're more of you have that same energy, but when it comes to going out and getting laid. You were the nighttime. I was the activities director of in the daytime. Let's go pet monkeys at the monkey sanctuary. Let's go do this. Let's go to a cenote. Let's go swim in this. And you were let's go get laid. I saw 3 bars on the way. And so tonight we're going to stop by those bars, and there was that one, we called him the conquistador, the really tall redheaded fellow. And you were
yes,
we're going to go get him for you. And you need to,
your birthday.
You need to have friends on you need to have both people need to show up for the event of life. You got to have both activities directors, and they just both come from different skill sets. Because you're let's get it popping. And I'm just I don't know. Is that safe?
I just don't have a lot of self-preservation. Not an embarrassment of riches in that regard.
Well, you just know what you want, and you're kind of down to clown. And I'm very much where is this going? And you're very much about the serendipity of it all. Where will we end up? And I think friendship requires both parties in that
yes.
It's a dance. It's like valence electrons, it's sort of it's Coulombic attraction. It's you need both parts to make a whole atom. I'm picking up the metaphor, but I'm
picking up what you're putting down so hard.
You get what I mean.
I'm lucky to have you to balance out my host.
And I need someone to bring some host. Be hey, remember when you were a fucking rebel? Remember that you're also an outlaw? So put down your fucking calendar and your calculator, get your tits out, and let's get out there and get some numbers up.
Let's work what God gave you.
Let's up those body counts, okay?
These numbers are great. I think we could do better next quarter. Okay. Back to Hedy. So it's July 1932. She is 17, and she has landed in Prague to chase her showmance and to star in the biggest film role of her career so far. It would define her screen image and impact her for the rest of her life and her career. And it was a film called Ecstasy, or Ecstasy. So initially, Hedy's father forbade her to go to Prague without her mother's oversight because she was only 17. But she insisted she didn't want her mom there because it would impact her performance. And the performance was probably her getting to get laid by her secret boyfriend. But in any case, she was also at this time, she started talking about this big contract with Paramount Pictures that she was just about to sign any day now. And as soon as this film wrapped up and received controversy, she kind of stopped talking about that deal that was happening any day now.
Yeah.
So it was the kind of thing that she went into thinking, holy shit, this is going to be a big role for me. I'm the star, to just completely folding in on herself after that, because it should have been great.
It can be devastating. I've talked about it on the show before, but I sold a show, a scripted TV series, and then we went into development, which is very common. And the thing and everyone told me going in, listen, maybe only 20% of what gets pitched or what gets into development is going to make it to a green light, right? And so while you're sitting in that process where you're kind of in development, right, you have gotten an offer, you've gotten like a contract that's telling you how much money you're going to make and how like what you're in season 2 and season 5. And you're so like, yeah, like everything's about to change. And as much as you try to stay like realistic and temper your expectations and remind yourself of those, the ratios are unforgiving. It's hard. And you like, I didn't tell anyone because I was like, in case it doesn't get made, I don't want to have to like walk that back or kind of have that embarrassment. But that's because I'm older. So I've had that self-control, right? Of like not just leading with that in every discussion with people that were asking me what I was doing. I would just say writing. And I'm glad for that. But man, it is devastating when you are just like so close, like you're so close to having the thing you want, and then it's gone, and they're like, because maybe you did something wrong, because like you didn't quite, you made a miscalculation, or that's kind of, so I can identify with like how that can be really devastating. You know, especially, yeah.
Well, I mean, for you, the studio came in love bombing you, talking about this 5-year plan they've got when they're not even really ready to fully commit. And I think we talked about this on a Friends podcast, but it's like, it's almost like you have to wait until the second trimester to announce your pregnancy with this kind of thing. And if you announce it too soon, and when you and I did Boss Bitches of History, that got made. That got shipped, half of it anyway. And that was really humbling because we pumped that. We did our goddamnedest. I think we did an amazing job. And then it got shelved after day one. And so that even when you get there, you're almost even more vulnerable. You know, if they had never made it, if it had gotten canned for some other reason, then I feel like it would have stung a little less.
It's kind of like how, especially when I have dark hair, people will tell me that I look like Angelina Jolie. And it's like worse than being unattractive, because it's like you're almost as attractive, right? As the most beautiful woman in the world, almost, but not quite. Like if your dad had like pumped 3 more times, you might have had a completely different life. Like who can say in that genetic lottery, in that last moment, right? Like if a different sperm had won the race, maybe, you know, maybe I'd be a glamorous movie star doing humanitarian work across the globe with Brad Pitt as an ex-husband, right?
I can only imagine you as a sperm just absolutely shanking and strangling anyone in your way, just pushing, elbows flying, just, I hope you get there, there's already a sperm there, and you're like, hey, excuse me and the lady actually had plans. The grown-ups are talking now, and just like booting their ass out.
Maybe we could get our producer Josh to make a little cartoon behind us while we have this conversation, because I do like the idea of me as a sperm being like a chola with like the big bangs and like fight rings on, like old school Fresno girl, like ready to go. Just like hold my purse. Like, you don't even know me, huh?
You've already got your hoops out.
You don't even know me, huh? Which is how you know you're about to be in trouble if you're ever in the Central Valley and someone says that to you. You're about to get fucked up. That's another way of saying like, you got me fucked up. What is like the white bread waspy version of that? Like, you got me fucked up. What would that be? Like, what would like your mom or dad say at work? So like, I'd probably be like, well, I got news for you. It's like probably something like that. Well, gosh darn it. Like,
you're cruising for a bruising, mister.
Well, I don't know who told you that.
No gratitude for this attitude.
I'm sure someone on TikTok has thought of it and it's genius. I'll find it later when I'm like doom scrolling. I was also just thinking though, at 17 and your parents let you go to Prague. You know, it'd be like one of us being 17 and our parents going like, yeah, you could move to New York City. You could move to Los Angeles. You could do that. Just like at 16 or 17. I mean,
the shit that I got from my parents when I took a trip to New York City with a friend after high school when I was 18, because we were going to a big city by ourselves, 2 adult women. I cannot imagine.
yeah.
Like, I wouldn't have the audacity to ask because I would already know the answer to the question and how long I'm going to get grounded for even thinking about something like that.
So I don't know enough about Austrian culture in terms of what is normal in like the family cycle, especially what was normal in the 30s. I do know that sort of universally Americans experience a longer adolescence than other people in terms of whatever, but also globally since probably like post 50s is when we really started to get like a really long adolescence. So I'm sure that in the 30s, she was considered an adult at 16 or 17, but I don't know what Austrian culture is around when a daughter leaves, like when would be a normal time for an unmarried daughter to leave the home, or if she would just normally have been expected to kind of stay there until there was a suitor to take her off. But that's pretty incredible.
Well, later on, she has a suitor that straight up is basically courting her parents because that was what you did at the time. If you want to date this young lady, you need to get her family on board. Later, after this, she does have a suitor who courts her basically through her family. So to some degree, that was an expectation of people of a certain class, I guess. But also, I think having your daughter become an adult and move out of the house versus having your daughter be technically an adult and by herself unwed in another country in this industry that even then they must have had some clue how young women fare.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell.
I mean, or maybe not, because I feel like maybe like in some ways too, I mean, it was also novel and I don't know how old other starlets like her tended to be at the time, if they tended to be that young, or if she was a little young even for the time to be kind of in that world. Because I don't know if you got this as like, let's say like as an attractive person, you get male attention a lot younger and faster. And so it also does, I feel like all the friends I've had that were pretty or attractive, right, seem to mature a lot faster because they would call like, oh, she's fast. It's like, because you're constantly being courted by like older dudes. And so you start getting exposed to different social things and kind of like the whole kit and caboodle. And it seems like in some ways that a girl like her that's like really, really beautiful and that beauty has already given her a level of power that's not commensurate with her actual social status, you know? So she has more power than a typical 17-year-old girl would from an upper middle class family because she's so beautiful that she's able to walk into studios and sets and just be like, give me a job. And men do because they're so defenseless against her beauty or whatever. So I think there's also something about when you recognize you have that kind of power over men that you would normally think of as like being above you.
So I didn't include this in the script, but that reminds me, I believe her mom at one point mentioned a teacher who was supposed to be reining in her behavior. And he said basically that she's so beautiful, I'm just helpless to her. He was so charmed by this teenage girl who he was teaching in a position of power of that he just like couldn't do his job and, you know, give her structure.
And I like that's kind of it's a common thing that happens even today with some teenage girls that end up being like problematic is they realize that men are attracted to them and that they're in a power position because they're minors and because like he's technically doing something wrong. And they are like, it's the first time that they feel a sense of power, empowerment, right? And it's all around this thing that they wield, right? And it's new and it's novel. And so, you know, they enjoy it, which I think is how grooming works, right? Like that's kind of when people are predatory, they pick up on that. And it kind of becomes this weird sort of like cat and mouse where it's like by talking up how powerful she is and mature and this and that, it's like, oh, this person recognizes my power and they respect it. And, you know, like that kind of like let her have enough sway until she's kind of pulled in. And then, you know, you hit her with the rope-a-dope. And then you turn around and you're super controlling and actually none of her beauty beguiles you in any way, shape, or form, which is a process called negging. And that is how, that's how it works. Anyway, giving away my secrets, giving away all the secrets. The film unfolds in a small village where Eva, a young woman, is trapped in a loveless and emotionally stifling marriage to Emil, an older man who is more interested in his hunting dogs than his wife. The marriage leaves Eva longing for affection and excitement, and she is unfulfilled both emotionally and physically. After a nude encounter at a lake, she pursues a handsome, rugged man named Adam, leading to a series of sensual and explicit encounters that were nothing short of groundbreaking for the era. At the end of the film, the two spend a final night together in a hotel before concluding that they can never see each other again. Unbeknownst to either of them, her husband is also at the hotel, having met Adam on his way in. When he realizes the situation, he commits suicide in his hotel room. At its core, Ecstasy revolves around Eva finding sexual exploration and fulfillment in the arms of another man in an act of rebellion against her disaffected husband who failed to consummate their marriage. The controversy surrounding Ecstasy primarily stems from two notable scenes.
The first was the nude swimming scene. In one scene, Eva, in a state of frustration and longing, decides to go for a nude swim in a lake near her home. This moment of liberation and communion with nature is captured on screen, showcasing Hedy's nude form. It was a transformative moment for cinema at the time, as full frontal nudity was virtually unheard of in mainstream films. The scene was deemed scandalous, and it was a major point of contention amongst censors and moral watchdogs, simply because she was naked, not because she was naked in 17. Hedy's nudity on screen in this film was shocking. It's sometimes misattributed as the first on-screen nude, and it's not even the first silver screen on-screen nude. I believe that honor goes to Audrey Munson in a 1915 film called Inspiration. However, this is contested, and this was not the subject of my research, so I didn't spend too much time.
I'm sure there are plenty of neckbeards out there with their own YouTube channels that have spent months and months poring over many, many nude scenes, arguing over which one was the first. I just see the comic store guy from The Simpsons. Worst nude ever.
And then the other scene was, do you want to tell us about it? The pop shot scene. Pop shot. I call it a pop shot in the script. It's not a pop shot. Pop shot is when you capture on someone's face.
Well, the pop shot is just the man coming.
It's hyperbole.
It doesn't have to be on your face. It's just called the money shot. It's called pop shot or money shot, which is that how you know that a sex scene is concluded is that man has. Otherwise, how would you know when it was over? How would you?
I mean, lesbians just continue to have sex until they die.
Okay, so the second controversial scene is what we call in the porn business, the money shot or the pop shot. So more than just being naked, there's a scene where Hedy has an orgasm. And this is depicted in the film. You can Google search it and there are stills from it. It's very hazy and dreamy, very beautiful, but it's very clear what's going on. It's very surprising for a film from the 30s. The female orgasm, there's a long history. We'll do it on another time, but there's a long history of female orgasm simulated in mainstream pictures is cut by censors by a wide margin over any depictions of men ejaculating in mainstream films. So it's okay for men to come in a mainstream movie and for it to get an R rating. But if a woman comes for too long, they can lose that R rating. It's very, very interesting. So it depicts, like, there are several passionate scenes. She's naked. And on top of that, not only is she naked in a scene, but she appears to be coming and in ecstasy. So that happened, right? And like we're kind of buried the lead there. Like the nudity, it's the intense depiction of sexuality and infidelity. So it's not even innocent sexuality. It's infidelity sexuality. It's a young woman with married to an older man. Then you've got the infidelity, the nudity, the orgasm. And supposedly the way that they got the images of her coming is that someone went underneath her and started poking her in the ass with like a straight pin to get her to like wince and kind of move around and squirm. To be fair, it would not surprise me that a 17-year-old girl would have no idea what coming was. I mean, she may have understood it conceptually, but I highly doubt she'd experienced it interpersonally.
I don't know, because she did come to Prague without parental oversight because she had this crush on this dude, and she's been engaged at least once. And
I mean, she may have been sexually active. I'm just saying I doubt any of those people actually made her come.
Oh. You know what? That is a really, really key point that I just skated right past. Just right. So they basically had her lay down. They told her to put her arms above her head, her elbows above her head, and they shot her sort of down, like from top down. And so you could see her, squirming around because these men don't know the difference of a woman in pain and a woman in pleasure. But yeah, so her performance was a bit of a revelation. She was very vulnerable. Her character's journey felt very honest because of this. Also during the sex scene, it kind of cuts to these really absurd, kind of silly, like there's a horse galloping and I think there's pearls snapping. I don't remember all of it, but it's a little cheesy, right? By my standards, but that's okay. So like you're saying, it was the portrayal of a woman who is unashamed of her desires, even when she is tied down to a man who doesn't care about her. And it was a little bit of a siren call to the repressed masses at the time. The film was celebrated and condemned. So it had implied penetrative sex, female orgasms, full frontal, infidelity, but people were really mad that it was a woman doing these things. It was considered a milestone in portraying women's desires and experiences on screen, which is really sad because it didn't really depict a woman's desires or experiences. It depicted what a man thought a woman wants and desires.
I mean, that tends to be the problem.
It won the Grand Prix at the Venice Film Festival in 1934, and Europe thought it was great. Europe thought it was artistic as f***. It was condemned by the papacy, though. I don't know if I remembered to mention that, but yeah, the Pope was not a fan of it.
Well, she was too old. She was too old. She was too old for that kind of activity. So,
wrong gender. Yeah. So when Ecstasy arrived on American shores, people were very curious because it was very controversial, and very conservative about it at the same time. So customs agents straight up set it on fire. They burned the first copy that came over, but the show must go on. So the distributor just kept ordering prints, knowing that at some point it's going to get through, and he appealed the case and he won. So eventually it got to America. But because of all of the different censorship laws, because of the perception of different people in different communities, they cut, at least from what I've read, 36 different versions of the film. In one German version, there's a scene where Eva is actually granted a divorce before she has sex with her lover, and then at the end they stay together and she has a baby because that's more palatable to some conservative palates at the time or imaginations at the time.
So is it like they turned it into a horror film is what you're saying?
She's only allowed to enjoy herself if she pays the ultimate price, which is lifelong servitude to a husband. Lifelong domestic servitude to her husband, and then making sure she has children that she is also in servitude to, in case her husband ever needs to take a break, then she's still got other people she can slave over.
God. Man, we've really been through it. Oh. Okay, so So the harshest criticism for Hedy came when she and her parents attended a screening in Vienna. She warned her parents that the film was very artistic, but that didn't prepare them for seeing their daughter nude on screen or in the throes of ecstasy. Her father stood up in the middle of the film and said, "We will go." And they walked out because of the sex scene. She moved home after and took a break from film, though it's hard to get a good sense of what her feelings were at the time. I have a feeling that her feelings were kind of irrelevant at that point. I think that was probably her parents' worst nightmare. I think that was something her parents had probably never even imagined. And then, because I'm sure their assumption was like, if she's doing it on camera, then she was probably doing it off camera as well, which is...
Well, there's also the fact that her dad is a really high... sort of high-level director or something at a really big bank. And so they host dinner parties. Her parents are socialites. Right. And so now their whole social scene, which they've kind of prioritized over parenting in some cases, now they have to face their social scene having the daughter that they have that everyone's talking about now.
I mean, that's got to be awkward at parties. Like... Hey, I saw Hedy's latest film, those tits. Not what I was expecting, but you know like the graceful way they lit her face while she was getting railed by an actor. You know what I mean? Like just, yes, the artistic choice. That had to have been. Exploring Hedy Lamarr's personal accounts regarding her experiences during the production of Ecstasy offers valuable insights into her perspective. Lamarr often expressed feelings of violation and exploitation, particularly in relation to the explicit scenes in the film, claiming she had been deceived about the extent of nudity displayed on screen. It is important to note, however, that there is evidence contradicting the assertion that she had no prior knowledge of the nudity. In fact, another actress was initially considered for the role but declined due to the nude scene, suggesting that Lamarr must have been aware of the script's content before filming began. In other sources, she blames the camera lens used, not realizing there would be close-up shots of her. I feel, as someone that's performed in adult film, you can carry kind of both feelings. Like there are things I did when I was really having a good time and thought they were like really edgy and really cool that I would not do now. And that I could look back and not the whole experience in adult, but I can definitely be like, oh, there were places where I was like, no, what if we did this and this? And like all the older people and more experienced pornographers in the room should have said something to me. Like, you know, like I didn't have that clarity. And part of it was just stuff that things you can get caught up in because you're caught up in the culture. And so at a time when like I was just in a part of the industry that was like, what's the most subversive, weird shit we can do? And it's like that slippery slope where it's like, you don't realize when you're in it, like what you're in, but because you're just so used to it and you're like, oh yeah. And then like, what about this? And then now like years later looking back, it's just like, huh? Then again, there are many scenes I turned down that I am so happy I did, even though it cost me a lot of money in the moment. Like, so I can still look back at certain things and be like, but you know, I did have a line. I did have a line and I did say no to a lot of things too, but I can get having an ambivalent feeling about what we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
And, you know, integrity can be very expensive.
Yes. Oh my God.
Very expensive. So I think her argument is super flimsy. I think she knew what she was doing. She was very precocious. She was, you know, she kind of called the shots in a lot of the stuff that she did. And I think she was probably to some degree enthusiastic about it because she did think it was artistic, because it was a little bit artful. She was the star of something that was controversial or subversive, just a little different. You know, that seemed to her, I bet, to be a really cool project that was going to be talked about. I just don't think she anticipated how it would be discussed. And I don't think she was prepared at all for the stigma, because I don't think she would have been prepared for rejection afterwards. If it had gotten panned just for being a bad film, I think she would have been pretty fucked up from that too. But because she was so nude and vulnerable in this thing that she was investing herself into, the backlash, I think, made her very defensive about things. And also now she's got the people who were profiting from this aren't necessarily standing by her and standing up for her. She's the only voices she's hearing are from people who are critical and angry and loud. Yeah, I think it was societal pressure. I think it was stigma. I think it was pressure from her family and their community.
Nothing can prepare you for the stigma, no matter how prepared you think you are for it.
No.
When the first time it hits you, it's devastating. The first time it really hits you, how society really feels about you for something as innocuous as being naked on film or having sex on camera, which is, you know, I mean, it's just at the end of the day is not curing cancer, and it's not an act of domestic terrorism. It's a very benign action, right? It's pedestrian, it's adenine, it's banal. But I mean, when people are like, oh, you watch porn, I'm like, I'm sorry. When I watch porn, it's just like watching open heart surgery. Like it's just okay. You know, like it's so demystified of any kind of whatever. It's just a scene, but nothing can prepare you. And now it makes more sense that a 17-year-old was doing this, because it might have been just like people were exploiting like her naivete, like her not understanding, like the actress that did decline the role was probably a little older and had a keener,
yes, she was,
and had a keener grip on how this was gonna, how the rollout for this is gonna look like. Because, you know, teenagers think they're gonna change the world. You know, they think that all the rules are not gonna apply to them. They're gonna be the first one where it's different. Like, it'll be different this time.
And she really thought she was exceptional.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, she was exceptional, but she was very much main character syndrome.
Yeah.
Girl.
I could see her doing this and thinking like, oh, like I'll be in a controversial, edgy film and it's going to catapult me to stardom. And I mean, I think it kind of did. Just it just took longer and kind of like, I think that if she hadn't done it, I don't think we would know who Hedy Lamarr is today. I think that it was a decisive action, and even though it made life more difficult in the beginning, it still put her in a place where she was kind of like a first. She was like, there was this thing about her that made her really stand out, even if it was in a negative way. It's still, people are now talking about who is this girl. Right.
Right. And it wasn't universally panned. It did win awards. It was well received amongst the communities that, you know, weren't Philistines, who had any idea of what to look for in an artistic film like this other than titties, you know?
And her, and, you know, and they were humble tits. It wasn't like I watched, and it's not gratuitous at all. Like, it's not, she has she's not particularly curvy. She's, and the images from it, they're not overly objectified, and they're very beautiful. It's very beautifully done, and it's not done in a way that's meant to kind of appeal to like a prurient interest. Like it does seem like it's meant to heighten the tension of the film, and it is meant to be celebratory. It's meant to be like sort of celebrating, not objectifying. So, you know, it didn't come across as crass or like a porno, you know, like it's very clear that it's art.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think everybody on set felt to some degree that they were making art. And I think that she felt, I think participating in the project with a bunch of artists also probably made her feel pretty confident in what they were doing.
Oh, I think that's what I was meaning to say earlier about the porn stuff, is that I was hanging in a group of like 3 or 4 people that we all were like, we're artists and we're doing like really interesting, cool stuff like Dana Vespoli or Gisley or, you know, like just really feeling like there was like this special time and place, and we were doing kind of different things than the movie that I directed that you were in. It felt like being of a certain time, and it felt like there was this moment in adult where, you know, more marginalized performers and voices could come forward and present kind of novel ideas about erotica. So in that bubble, you make certain choices, and then years later, you look back and you don't have that bubble around you anymore that's sort of protecting you, and you're able to see it like how it looks from the outside world, and you're like, oh, maybe someone should have thought more, you know, like maybe that wasn't cool to be doing things just to be subversive or edgy. Like maybe that wasn't, it felt at the time like something really important to do, but like looking back, it's like, was it? But with that stuff, at the end of the day, even if it's not, you still made a porno, and that's gonna sell, you know? So like at the end of the day, even if you didn't achieve those edgy goals, or you did in the wrong ways, the goal was to make a porno, and by golly, you made a porno. And that's the other beauty. The beauty of it later is, you know, that they got to get through all the porn. So I doubt anyone else is watching any of my porn and being like, now why did she consent to this storyline? This storyline seems unethical. This storyline makes me uncomfortable. No one's doing that.
No, that would require them exposing themselves to the actual body of work. Instead, they read the titles and get mad about it and read them off in Cal OSHA as though I wrote them myself and picked them out, as though I tatted them on my ass or something. That's an aside. A lot of the quotes that I can find from her about this are not necessarily actually from her. I've got her autobiography right here, Ecstasy and Me by Hedy Lamarr. This book was crafted by a ghostwriter from audio recordings that somebody had when they interviewed Hedy, kind of out of context, and then those were transcribed and then translated. So you're already going through a couple different minds at this time, because the process of transcribing and translating is something that a person had to personally physically do. And then in addition to that, she signed the deal on this book when she was very overwhelmed, and based on the biopic about her, she kind of just waved it. She just signed the paperwork and kind of hoped that someone else would be the grown-up in the room for her. So when it was made, it's absurdly over the top. She talks about how she's oversexed a bunch. And considering that she was trying to put a lot of miles between herself and that image, I find this really hard to treat as a reference book. And it just seems like kind of erotic fiction, erotic fan fiction. And the ghostwriter who wrote it, I actually come to this, I think, in one of the later episodes, but he talks about it as though, you know, my job was to sell books, and based on the checks that I cashed, I did.
Yeah.
His job wasn't to portray her authentically. It was to sell books. And so this book is full of stuff that is just, I mean, you can't really take it as anything but some man's fantasy about Hedy Lamarr. So yeah, it's kind of hard to even suss out what her real quotes were about this. She tried to put, you know, distance between her and the film afterwards, and her, even the way she describes it in actual interviews later changes. A lot of things change as she gets older, and I think that's just a matter of your perspective and recollection changing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, when I look back on my adult career, I feel ambivalence about it, because there was stuff that was really cool and awesome and amazing, people I met that were really cool and places I traveled and the kind of sex misadventures I got into that were fun. And then there's also stuff that made me, when I look back and I feel like some PTSD. I feel like things that at the time felt fine, but now I look back and I'm like, well, I think that was like actually a little bit traumatic for me, or stuff like that. And I think that's fine, you know, because as we grow and we change and we move through life and we have different failures and successes, we're always kind of trying to reverse engineer. And I think that's the problem when you try to sit down and write any kind of a memoir too, is there's always some kind of thesis, right? Which is because XYZ happened, like that got me to here. And so they tend to be written with a kind of perspective for like where we're going to end up. And then everything that's happened in our lives, like we're trying to figure out how that led to the next thing, which led to the next thing, which led to whatever. And so that also can skew the way we remember things and whatnot, and like whether or not we've been through therapy or whether or not other things have happened, So it could be that, I go to therapy and I find out I have PTSD about something. And then when I'm remembering the things I went through, I might look at an event that before to me was innocuous and be like, oh shit, that must have really traumatized me, because it was like shortly after that is then when XYZ happened, And so there's also that element, which is kind of why I think memoir is a tricky thing to write in the first place, because inevitably people become caricatures of themselves. And like I said, there's so much kind of reverse engineering going on. So it's like trying to find something in your past that explains how you got to the present. And in searching for that, your memories can start to change. Like that's the other thing, is like memory is like not great. And that, like, 'cause they're doing these studies now that it's like every time you access a memory, you change it slightly. So the more that you recall the same event over and over and over again, it can completely change while it feels very real to you, which is why in a lot of cases now, when it comes to like court cases and stuff, there's an effort to not prepare a witness too much. Because if you prepare a witness too much, their actual memory of the events will change. All right, is that us? Is that us for this week? We gonna?
That's an episode. Next week we will see how she moves on from Ecstasy, and I'm really excited to share her story.
Yay!
Thank you.
All right, I love you now. Yeah. Oh, let's do some housekeeping.
Good job.
Oh
yeah. So I
You don't have to list all your sources. Notes are linked on the show notes for this week's episode. Will be linked all the sources. You can follow us on Twitter and TikTok at illreputepod. You can email us at illreputepod@gmail.com. You can find us on TikTok at We Are Ill Repute. You can find us on Facebook at Ill Repute a Podcast. And most exciting, you can now find us on YouTube. It is censored, so you don't get all the bad words, but you can watch the video there. So if you go to youtube.com, and then we are at ill_repute. And the video version of these podcasts is there. And if you subscribe and sign up, it's really, it'll really make us feel good about who we are as people.
And more importantly, tell your smart friends to check us out. I've noticed that all of my smart friends text me every week to talk about the show. Not all of my smart friends. A lot of my smart friends are too busy, but they won't be listening to this to be offended that I just said that. So, but tell someone, because word of mouth is what really helps. We've only got so many people who already know who we are, and we're hoping to reach beyond that, because the stories that we're telling are important.
Like, tell your friends. Shark.
That's it. We need to make sure.
We do need to make sure. I got so many.
You can find the existing merch at importantadult.com.
Yes. All right.
All right. Your hosts today were Sovereign Syre and Ela Darling. The script was written by me, Ela Darling. The show is produced by Joshua Anderson. Thank you so much, Josh. And we'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.